March 12, 1945. Western Front, a ruined farmstead 2 kilometers east of Aachen. Oberfeldwebel Karl Neumann counted engine minutes and 45 rounds of main ammunition, and knew time was the enemy. Inside the turret, the world narrows to metal, breath, and small arithmetic. Gear teeth click with a patient authority, the rangefinder ticks its little sums, and the loader moves brass with the economy of habit. The tank smells of hot primer and scorched grease. The air is sweet with burnt oil that clings to the back of the throat. He can state his supplies like a ledger. 45 main rounds in the rack, roughly 60 engine minutes if the roads hold, and a combat pulse that has climbed from 76 to the high 80s beneath the armour. He times his lungs, 18 small intakes per minute, each one a quiet accounting against the minutes he has left to act. The periscope frames a hedgerow and the broken spine of a wall. Outside that slit of sight, the farm holds silence and the potential for sudden violence. His palm finds the mantlet and stays there as if touch could steady the world. The crew moves in clipped syllables and practiced choreography, commands answered in a single word. Discipline is a small religion in the turret, and technique its sacrament. Neumann runs the ballistic tables again in his head, the tiny corrections, the hairline lead, the breath held until the seam where shell meets armour opens and the moment is over. The Tiger is an argument in cast steel, thick frontal plate, optics balanced to a hair, a gunner's training meant to make each round count. He carries a private sentence like a talisman. I will not let a lesser gun decide my fate. The oath tastes of iron and apprenticeship, formed under fluorescent light and repeated across muddy ranges. A sound arrives that is not part of their ritual, a noise too sharp to be routine and too bright to be a medium gun. A dry, high-velocity crack, sharp and hollow. It arrives from an unexpected bearing and rattles the turret. The loader's hand trembles. The crew startles. Somewhere forward, the rumour hardens into a report. Field teams are mounting heavier guns on fast chassis, ordnance crews swapping barrels and balancing shots on frames never meant for such power. It is crude, until it is not. Persistence, repair, and repetition begin to feel like a weapon in themselves. He remembers the lectures that framed excellence as the decisive factor, the officers who taught that perfection in manufacture and gunnery could settle a flank. He reads again, in his mind, a fragment found in a burned hull. Keep moving. Shoot what you see. Fix what you must. Push until they tire. It is not elegant. It claims endurance. He trusts craft. The battlefield preferred presence. They taught that victory belonged to the factory and the gunnery school, that one superior chassis with one perfect shot could finish a fight. The Tiger seemed to prove the creed on calm days. Thick frontal armour, fine optics, a gun that rewarded patience. But battle keeps a different ledger. Presence, repair speed, and replaceability decide who can still be on the lane after the first exchange. Measured that way, perfection turns into a fragile luxury, the side that can show up again, and soon, takes the field. Briefing halls mocked field expedients and improvised mountings. Instructors warned that crude solutions were a confession of weakness, that one clean shot was worth 10 messy ones. That confidence began to fray when reports showed the enemy putting heavier guns on mobile carriages and bringing them back after quick repairs. The lecture room ideal met a production line reality, and the line was winning. Production set the boundaries of loss. Tiger 1 output totaled about 1,347 vehicles across the run. Peak monthly production reached roughly 104 in April 1944. Each loss was not a pause measured in days. It was a deficit measured in months. The American answer multiplied firepower across families. Before the end of the war, 310 Pershings were sent to Europe, and about 200 issued to frontline units. At the same time, the M36 tank destroyer family put the 90mm gun into the lanes in well over 1,400 examples. Parallel upgrades moved a very large share of Shermans to the higher velocity 76mm gun by late 1944 and 1945. The pattern mattered more than any one machine. There were more platforms with good enough guns, and there were enough of them to return after damage. Maintenance turned output into presence. American ordnance practice standardized subassemblies and leaned on repair by replacement. Forward teams swapped road wheels and track blocks, pulled power packs, patched fuel systems, and sent hulls back into action near the line. That work was counted in tens of hours, not in weeks. Heavy vehicles that needed depot lifts and scarce parts sat in queues and consumed rail capacity. Medium platforms and tank destroyers cycled faster. When repair time is short, a hit is a delay, not a disappearance. Ballistics completed the loop from factory to field. A 90mm gun on a mobile platform did not make every shot decisive, but it changed the odds over the span of an engagement. Repeated shot opportunities from shifting angles tested tracks, mantlet edges, lower plates, and sights. The heavy tank that trusted a single master shot and a frontal shield now faced a series of acceptable shots from multiple directions. The point was not a miracle round. The point was a rising probability applied by vehicles that would be back tomorrow if they were knocked out today. Inside a turret, the math felt like breath and heat. If an enemy section could put 3 solid hits on the field each minute, 10 minutes of pressure meant 30 impacts to absorb, avoid, or answer. Every correction to keep a safe angle burned fuel. Engine minutes fell away under the strain of pivots and short dashes. A crew that began with an hour of useful engine life could lose half of it simply staying ahead of the next string of shots. Damage to a track or road wheel cut that time again. Precision demanded stillness and clean sight pictures. Saturation denied both on purpose. The duel became a schedule, and the schedule did not favor a rare machine that could not be replaced quickly. Supply practice pushed the same pressure from the rear. Ammunition and parts arrived on time for the formations that organized their roads and railheads to feed the fight. Those commanders could risk lanes, accept losses, and keep fire steady. The side with rare vehicles and thin stocks had to conserve, and conservation ceded initiative to opponents who treated return to service as a weapon. A repaired tank destroyer rolling out of a forward workshop at dusk was not a footnote. It was another chance to appear in the same lane tomorrow with a cool barrel and a full rack. Pride resists this conclusion because it asks the craftsman to admit that a system can beat a masterpiece. Yet that is what late war fields showed. A Pershing bringing a 90mm to a village edge. An M36 slipping along a hedge, firing a short string, and clearing before counterfire lands. A medium tank with a 76mm gun fixing an enemy, while the heavier barrel moves for the angle. None of these moves is elegant on its own. Together they make a process that punishes the belief that one perfect shot will always settle the matter. A dry, high-velocity crack, sharp and hollow, arrives from an unexpected bearing and makes the turret ring. That sound is not romance. It is a production line, a repair shift, a convoy, and a crew drilled to fire again. Availability beat perfection because it could be counted on tomorrow as well as today. March light angled across the hedgerow, and the field looked quiet enough to believe in manuals. Neumann climbed the checklist he had worn into his bones. Range announced in a flat voice. Target type called with one clipped syllable. Traverse trimmed in small bites until the reticle kissed the crease where a farm lane cut the orchard. Elevation nudged half a mark and no more. The loader confirmed one armor piercing round seated. The driver held the Tiger angled a fraction off square to keep the frontal plate honest. A turret silhouette eased along the low wall. Neumann rode the last hairs of correction and let the shot go. Recoil came back as a square blow through steel into muscle. Downrange the upper hull took it hard. Dust and peeled fragments lifted. The tank slumped and stalled at a crooked angle. It looked exactly like the classroom photograph under the caption that promised a master shot could finish a meeting of forces. The field did not end with that target. Another shape slid into the same lane as if the first loss had been priced into the plan. Smoke bulged from a canister under the second tank's fender. A third hull nosed out of the left hedge with its turret already hunting. A fourth presence was felt before it was seen, the way a room shifts before a door opens. The Tiger backed the length of its cover and reset angle. Neumann called a whisper of wind and watched the smoke smear. He held the second target at the edge of the sight picture, timing the moment the driver would commit to an exit. There should have been time for a second clean shot. Instead, a dry, high-velocity crack, too sharp and hollow to be a familiar medium thump, slapped the turret like a hand on a bell. The loader's hands twitched. The radio hissed about right flank and orchard edge. For a heartbeat, the glass caught a low silhouette, squat and muzzle heavy, already sinking behind trees. The board had more pieces than the diagram in his head. The enemy method was not elegant, but it was relentless. A 90mm on a mobile carriage needed no ceremony. A section could shift 2 hedgerows in a few minutes, trade road dust for a new angle, and arrive with barrels cool enough to shoot a measured string. If a crew took a hit, they did not vanish. They rolled to a forward workshop, changed a track block or a wheel station, bled a line, packed fresh racks, and came back before a staff map upstairs admitted there had been a gap. Firing was a rhythm more than a performance. Loaders palmed long brass with a drummer's economy. Gunners used coarse elevation and walked the first round in, then corrected with the next instead of hunting a single perfect instant. Commanders treated distance as a variable to bully, taking small edges of meters to force a target to show a slice of plate that had been safe a second before. The method had no flourish and fewer delays. Saturation punished precision because it multiplied angles and stole time. One gun held the lane and kept a crew honest behind a wall. A second searched for a lower seam from farther right. A third edged toward the place where a mantlet lip would show when the Tiger traversed to answer the second threat. Even when the Tiger killed a tank, the kill consumed seconds and fuel the other side gladly traded to keep pressure. Smoke cut lines of sight just enough to steal the stillness fine shooting demands. A mortar dropped soft rounds somewhere behind the orchard. The near misses did nothing but shake the hands that needed to be quiet. Machine guns worried at slits and periscope glass. A short dash of 20 meters by an enemy hull turned a safe angle into a problem because safety in steel lives 1 second at a time. Precision asks for quiet and a breath held to the edge of discomfort. The other side denied both on purpose. The first kill looked like mastery. The next minutes looked like a bill that charged by target and by traverse, and by how long a crew could remain calm while a schedule hunted them. Inside the Tiger, the price was paid in breath, heat, and engine minutes that vanished faster than anyone wanted to admit. Neumann felt his pulse slide from the high 80s into the 90s, while the loader called contact right, then left, then right again. Every correction burned fuel. Every pivot cost seconds of the engine's life. The fan dragged scorched air across the back of his neck, and the smell of warm electrical varnish rose too fast for comfort. The driver whispered that the left track felt heavy, that a few more pivot turns would make the tread walk if they did not ease it. Impacts on the wall kicked dust into the periscope. Each small storm stole the clean picture that good shooting requires. Neumann lined a second target and felt the gun resist as he overcorrected to answer a shadow in his peripheral vision. His breathing lost the neat cadence he could count on and broke into uneven pulls. Precision begins in the lungs. The field was stealing his air. Numbers made the method possible. By the first months of 1945, hundreds of 90mm armed vehicles were in the European theatre when Pershings and the M36 family were counted together, and a very large share of Shermans carried the higher velocity 76mm gun. That volume meant a damaged gun was a delay, not a disappearance. It meant there would be fresh barrels to fill a lane by afternoon, even if morning crews had been driven off it. The second phase of the fight turned mechanics into feeling. Neumann tried to slow the battle by ritual. He placed his palm on the mantlet and held it there for one heartbeat to steady his hands. He spoke the old cadence for the loader to knot the crew back into one body. It worked for a few seconds. The driver eased the hull back along its cover, while Neumann held traverse against the urge to chase everything at once. The thought came that one clean shot would buy space for the next, that a master act would reset the field. The orchard cracked again. The turret rang. A fine rain of dust fell from somewhere no one could check while rounds were still walking the stone. The driver repeated that the left track felt wrong, and because the voice was very calm, the meaning was very bad. Saturation is a design of small insults that add up to injury no single act of skill can answer. One gun fixes the defender in a lane, while a second steals a plate that was safe a moment ago. Smoke steals 2 seconds of sight. A mortar round steals 1 breath. A machine gun steals clarity from a periscope for the blink it takes to clear grit from an eye. Each theft is cheap and deliberate. Together they turn a duel into a process. The process favors the side that set out to repeat itself rather than to be perfect. The enemy radio net sounded like men who were not in love with sentences. Shift right 2 fields. Hold smoke. 3 shots and back. We will swap you. The voice was calm because the work was routine. A unit that could rotate guns by the field and clear for ammunition, or a quick repair without leaving the lane uncovered, had turned presence into a schedule. The schedule was the weapon. It did not care that a tiger could end a fight in 1 shot. It cared that the next vehicle could arrive in 5 minutes and ask the same hard questions again. Neumann tried to read the lane like a book he had studied for years. The paragraphs were out of order. The commas were gone. The period at the end of a sentence was now a semicolon that pushed one clause into another. He knew exactly when in training he would have taken a breath to steady the squeeze. He did not have it here. He thought of how many minutes of engine life remained if they kept pivoting and backing and lunging, and how many minutes they had to hold until anyone could credibly promise relief, and he could not make the numbers meet in his head. The last sequence made the point no lecture ever had. A low silhouette crossed the gap between 2 trees, muzzle dipping with ruts. Another hull behind smoke fired 3 rounds in a walk and reversed. A third wink of metal in the far hedge went still, not to hide but to wait for what the other 2 would force. Neumann took his shot at the mover, and might have hit or maybe only shaved paint. A hollow slap answered from the orchard and the turret rang. The loader's hands stayed steady because hands can learn steadiness even when voices cannot. The driver began to speak about the track in that very calm tone again. Across the wind, the enemy net carried 1 short line. Keep moving, shoot what you see, fix what you must, push until they tire. A dry, high-velocity crack followed. Louder than before, a flat report that made the air seem thin, and the tiger knew it was being hunted by a schedule rather than by a single man. The air thickened with burned oil and wet soil as clouds stacked low over the orchard and the light went flat. Every sound came closer to the skin. The fan whined a little higher. The intercom hissed like a damp fuse. The driver inched the hull along its cover, and the tiger groaned as if the weight itself had started to complain. Neumann watched the lane through a periscope salted with grit and felt the room shrink around his shoulders. The loader's glove creaked. The sight picture slid in small, ragged jerks as the turret fought ruts and roots, never quite still enough for the breath he wanted to hold. Somewhere to the right, a mortar went lazy and soft in its timing, and still managed to land close enough to make fine dust mist the glass. The smell of hot electrical varnish turned from a suggestion to a statement. He did not need a watch to know that minutes were sliding away faster than doctrine allowed. The first crack came like a test of nerves, and the second like a verdict. A dry, high-velocity report struck the turret with a hollow slap and left a ring that crawled along the steel and into bone. The sound did not bloom like a blast. It snapped the air thin and left the crew blinking as if someone had turned down the world. The tiger jolted as a fragment whipped off the wall and rattled across the roof. The loader's hands stayed steady because hands learn steadiness even when voices cannot. The driver said the left track was walking and kept his voice level, which meant he was holding the fear by its throat. The radio offered 1 clipped warning, and then only static. The third crack was closer and harder, a flat note that made the mantlet shiver under Neumann's palm. For a second, the periscope held nothing but grey smear and a sliver of hedge, and he understood without deciding that the enemy had the angle and the schedule both. He reached for the old ritual and found it did not fit the moment. The oath he had carried since gunnery school sat in his mouth like a stone that would not swallow. I will not let a lesser gun decide my fate. The words had always steadied his hands. Now they made them heavy. He had 1 clean shot in him if the field would give him stillness for the length of a breath. It would not. The driver whispered again about the track and added that they had perhaps 20 minutes of engine life if they kept pivoting at this rate. The loader was ready because he is always ready, and that felt like a kind of shame in itself. Neumann saw the orchard edge flash with the squat muzzle he had glimpsed before, and knew that any perfect shot he placed would be answered by another barrel in 5 minutes, then another, because the method on the far hedge ran on repairs and rotation and presence. That knowledge was not an idea. It was a weight that settled behind his ribs and asked him to choose between pride and his crew. He gave the order the oath forbade, Fire and withdraw 2 lengths. Smoke if you have it. Do not chase angles. Keep the hull alive. The words tasted like a surrender to arithmetic. The loader moved without looking at him. The driver answered in the same level tone and nudged the Tiger back along its cover. The round left the barrel as honest as any he had ever fired and went into the lane to buy seconds rather than victory. He hated that purpose as soon as he named it. Retreat was not the word. It was a correction to a book whose grammar had changed. Behind the smoke the orchard answered with that dry crack again, and the roof rang, and a little shower of rust ticked across Neumann's cheek. He kept the traverse calm, because a calm traverse is sometimes the only thing a crew can still respect. He tried to explain to himself why skill felt so small. In training, a master shot ended a fight. In this lane, a master shot ended a paragraph. The other side had written a schedule. A damaged gun was a delay, not a disappearance. A barrel that warmed wrong or a track that popped a pin was a short ride to a workshop and a return before noon. The lesson of the factory had been translated into a field method that did not need elegance to be lethal. They brought enough 90mm barrels and enough 76mm mediums to keep a lane busy until any single act of excellence lost definition in the blur. Even if he killed 2 today, the third would apply the same pressure because the system that fed it could. He thought of production runs he had mocked in staff briefings months ago, and he hated his own certainty more than the numbers he had refused to respect. He pressed the intercom switch and spoke a line he knew would end up on paper because shame makes men right. We trained for perfection. The world now counts how often you can come back. The next minutes measured the cost. The driver saved the left track by giving up a firing position that had felt like a promise. They handed the lane to the enemy for the time it took to breathe behind the hedge and check the shoes and the idler and the heat bleeding from the engine deck. Ammunition was not the limit, fatigue was, and the creeping sense that every pivot traded life for seconds. A runner came up the ditch with a message about a relief element that might be 2 villages away if the bridge held. The loader rolled his shoulders and checked the racks again because movement keeps hands from thinking too much. Neumann watched the smoke thin and counted what was left. Fuel for perhaps 40 minutes if they stopped pivoting. Engine for less if they kept dancing. A crew that could shoot well enough to live and not well enough to change the shape of the fight. He marked the second hand, not because time told him what to do, but because a man needs to point at something when he orders other men to keep their heads down. The orchard did not rest to honour their decision. A silhouette edged to a new notch in the hedge and waited with the patience of a method that never tires. Somewhere behind it, a team with a toolbox would already be cleaning a clogged line or taping a cracked periscope hood so that another barrel could join the lane by evening. The sound that came next was smaller and closer, and somehow even more confident, the dry note that makes air feel thin and makes the skin prick as if it has learned to hear the shape of metal. The Tiger lived through it. Living through it felt like losing when the point of life was only to leave the lane without more damage than they could fix in the next hour. He understood then that his craft had become a way to spend time instead of a way to buy it. Precision was still beautiful. It was no longer decisive. The lane belonged to a process that would keep asking the same question until fatigue or fuel or a fault in a bearing answered for him. He breathed slow on purpose because slow breathing was something left to decide, and because the loader could hear it and would know the commander was still a human being and not a mask. They eased 1 more length back and took the road bend that broke the orchard from view. The radio crackled with a clipped instruction to stand by for orders at the next crossroads and to expect resupply on the hour if traffic allowed. It was not an insult. It was a schedule taking care of itself. He trusted craft. The battlefield preferred presence. Dusk pooled in the ditch behind the crossroads barn, and the wind carried the cool smell of wet earth and burned primer. Neumann crouched by a stack of captured crates and found a single 90mm casing in the straw. The metal felt cool against his palm, heavier than he wanted to admit. The rim nicked where a loader's glove had rushed the edge. He set it beside a dented German spent case, and the contrast looked like an argument left on the floor. One spoke of craft and scarcity. The other spoke of presence. The Tiger waited 30 meters away behind a line of willows, engine ticking as it shed heat, paint powdered with orchard grit. The crew kept their voices low, the way men do when noise feels like a promise they cannot keep. On the crate lid, a maintenance tag hung from a twine loop. Grease stains blurred some of the pencil, but the sequence was clear enough to read without help from an officer. Gun cleaned at 1,000. Track shoe replaced at 1,035. Refueled at 11:05. Re-entered lane at 1,140. There was nothing dramatic in the scrawl, only a schedule that fit a day like a glove. Another tag listed rounds expended in a short window, and the note that an ammunition truck would meet the crew 2 fields back after noon. A captured logbook torn from its binding added a column of times and places that made Neumann's stomach sink with a mechanic's understanding. A gun that could leave the line, be patched, and return within an hour was not an anecdote, it was a fact with legs. He looked at the casing again and thought of the morning lane where the same dry crack had made the turret ring. The casing and the tag said it would ring again by evening. Someone had translated a few diary lines into clumsy German and clipped them into the logbook with a bent staple. The handwriting on the original was neat, almost boyish. The sentence that mattered sat alone on the page, as if the writer meant to hear it out loud. We shot well. They came back tenfold, and they came back fast. After a while, our skill felt like a story we told ourselves to pass the time. Neumann read it twice and did not argue with a stranger. The final count wrote itself in breath and minutes. In the morning lane, the enemy section had managed to put about 3 solid hits a minute into the wall, the lane, the bends where a turret had to show to see. 10 minutes at that pace meant 30 impacts that had to be absorbed, dodged, or answered. Each correction took fuel and patience. Each pivot shaved life from the left track and heated the engine into a range where a seal could bulge. They began with roughly an hour of safe engine time. Half of it evaporated into pivots and short dashes before noon. Damage and heat trimmed more. What had looked like 60 minutes of freedom to move and choose became 20, then 10, then a gamble. The guns across the field did not need a perfect shot because repeated acceptable shots stole the air from a crew's lungs and the choices from a driver's hands. When a tank destroyer left to fix a leak, it returned. When a Pershing burned a rack, it met a truck and came back to the lane. When a medium lost a shoe, it put on another by the hedge and moved again. The field did not care that a tiger could still kill. The field asked how long it could keep moving while the other side kept returning. In that arithmetic, a master shot bought a paragraph of time and nothing more. He closed the logbook and set the 90mm casing back where he found it. The loader stood by the tiger with his sleeves rolled and his hands black with work that did not show rank. The driver checked the shoes with the back of his fingers the way a man checks a child's fever. Neumann understood that his craft had not betrayed him. It had simply become a way to spend time instead of a way to buy it. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and felt grit scratch under his skin. "We were precise and they were present," he said, soft enough that only his own crew could hear. Presence won. From a historian's distance, the lane outside the orchard reads less like a duel and more like a process. Late-war Europe fused industry and tactics into one operating rhythm that rewarded return to service and punished rarity. Engineers had been right about the Tiger's excellence and about the value of a perfect shot, but they were wrong about the scale of the contest. Railheads, workshops, fuel convoys, and ordnance crews decided how many barrels could appear in an hour. That count reshaped what any single act of mastery could accomplish. Neumann's private fear had always been simple. He feared that craftsmanship would be made irrelevant by numbers and by guns that were merely good enough. In the quiet after the orchard, he accepted that fear, not as defeat of skill, but as proof that skill had been moved to a different tier of importance. He still valued the clean shot and the calm order that steadied a loader's hands. He knew, however, that the field now paid more for the ability to return. The machine he loved had not betrayed him. The world around it had changed the price of its virtues. Acceptance came in the language crews understand. Fuel minutes, running, gear heat, the feel of a walking track, the time it took for the enemy to come back. The contest settled on a clear philosophy. Availability beat perfection because it turned time into a weapon. Presence on the lane was a resource. Repair was a resource. Ammunition, forward workshops, and swappable parts were resources. When downtime fell and acceptable fire could be delivered again and again, rare excellence could not carry the day. The 90mm did not erase the Tiger's strengths. It erased the assumption that such guns would be scarce or absent. The winning method did not sneer at mastery. It simply refused to let outcomes hinge on it. It asked two questions. Can we put acceptable fire on that target now, and can we do it again an hour later? The side that could answer yes to both questions defined the battle's shape. One ratio captured the shift. Sustained rounds per target per hour, set against average downtime minutes per tank, became the measure that fused emotion and material reality. When the first number rose and the second fell, pressure accumulated faster than any single precise act could relieve. Crews on the wrong end of that ratio found themselves counting breaths and engine minutes instead of opportunities. They were not beaten by one shot. They were worn down by a schedule. The aftermath travelled forward into design and doctrine. Armoured forces favoured vehicles that could be produced and maintained at scale, with engines and transmissions that could be swapped near the line, and with gun families that could be improved without rebuilding the whole chassis. Training still honoured precision, but planners wrote routes for recovery and return. Fire control aids, radios, standardised parts, and maintenance drills traced a straight line from a muddy orchard to post-war workshops. The lesson for modern units is not to discard excellence, but to package it so it can be repeated on time. Neumann had trusted craft. The age that followed trusted presence, and it won because it arrived, fired, and returned.